Genshin Impact's patch 4.8 is right around the corner, and it brings us not only a very interesting new 5-star in the form of Emilie, but also many long-awaited reruns with Navia, Nilou, and Yelan. Quite a lot of potent units, so you might be asking yourself, who should I pull for? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. In fact, we're going to go over all of these characters, explain what they can do, how good they are, which teams they synergize well with, and most importantly, how free-to-play friendly they are, so you know exactly which one of them is the best choice for your personal account. And with that being said, let's jump right into it. Starting out with the very hard-hitting Geo lady from Fontaine, Navia. Navia is a Geo Claymore user, and she's an on-field DPS, but also kind of not really. She's in a very interesting spot, so let's talk about her kit to understand what's really going on here. Navia's normal attacks don't really matter. The main portion of her damage is her elemental skill, which turns her umbrella, her gunbrella, into a shotgun that deals tons of Geo damage to enemies in front of you. This one can either be tapped, where she's simply going to shoot at the nearest enemy, or held, where you can aim a bit more precisely, and this is very important, if you hold the button, she's going to suck up nearby crystallized particles, and we're going to talk in a second about why this is so good here. Anyway, one very important thing to note here is that her shotgun projectiles have punch-through, meaning if enemies are neatly grouped together, she can hit multiple of them at the same time, even if there are other enemies in front of her. This is very good, and she can deal tons and tons of damage with this skill. Also, after firing the gunbrella, she will get Geo Infusion on her normal attacks for the next 4 seconds. Now, why is it so important to suck up crystallized particles with her? See, when you play Navia, you have this little ammo counter in the middle of your screen. This one can count up to 6, and you will get 1 more ammo every time you pick up a crystallized particle, either with Navia herself or with one of her teammates. What this ammo counter does is, the higher it is, the more damage you will deal with her when you use her skill. When you play her, ideally what you want to do is you want to have it at 3 already when you fire the first shot, and then hopefully you'll get enough crystallized shards during her on-field time to fill that up to 3 again, so you can fire another shot. However, if you just wanted to fire one big shot, then it's best to wait until you have it full up to the maximum of 6. So yeah, that is why you ideally want to hold her skill button to suck in nearby crystallized particles to refill the ammo before unleashing the shot to deal more damage. Let's also quickly talk about her burst. This one is actually not that important in terms of damage because it doesn't deal that much, however it helps greatly with getting more ammo for her skill. When you cast her burst, she will unleash a sort of artillery barrage that rains down geometeorites, so to speak, on nearby enemies, and this meteorite shower will also continue when she's not on the field anymore. These raining down geo attacks will refill her ammo for her skill and also create even more crystallized particles if there are any reactions going on, which furthermore helps with the ammo regeneration. What that means for you at the end of the day is, the main damage that she can deal is from her elemental skill, so you want to rank that up really high. Her normal attacks don't really matter all that much, and also her burst doesn't have that much of a high priority in terms of damage, it's more to feed her elemental skill. Now, with all of that in mind, how strong is Navia? See, the great thing about Navia is that her damage coming from her elemental skill is very front-loaded. What that means is that she'll do the majority of her damage right at the beginning of her on-field time by unleashing her skill. The numbers she deals here are quite impressive, and if you're looking for a Geo DPS, she is definitely worth considering. When it comes to which weapon she can use, of course her signature, the Verdict, is going to be her best in slot, what a surprise, right? But she has many more options. For example, the Beacon of the Red Sea would do well with her. Then, if you have any other 5-star weapons that help with crit or attack, like the Red Horn Stone Thresher or the Wolf's Gravestone, for example, these are definitely worthwhile stat sticks. The Serpent Spine would probably be her best in slot 4-star weapon, albeit from the Battle Pass, but it's really good. And if you have it, the Ultimate Overlord's Mega Magic Sword from a Fontaine event is also pretty cool because it not only gives you energy recharge, which helps big time with the burst, but also a lot of attack from its effect. And in case you don't have any of these, then the Black Cliff Slasher will do, albeit not as great as the previously mentioned swords. Okay, now let's talk about her teams for a minute because this is where it gets really interesting and it is important that you understand this. See, most main on-field DPS characters in the game follow a clear pattern, and that is, they're the hyper carry, and the team is just there to set up buff, set up heal, and then they stay on the field for longer, dealing a lot of damage. With Navia, however, this is not really the case. Because of the fact that her damage is so front-loaded and happens right at the beginning of her being switched onto the field, her on-field time is relatively low. Remember, after using her skill, she gets a 4-second infusion of Geo onto her weapon. This is pretty much her maximum on-field time, and just 4 seconds for a main DPS is quite a short time. So I personally would recommend to use her as sort of a quick swap unit in teams where it fits. For example, if you have a team with an on-fielder that also has not that much of a long on-field time but a relatively long cooldown, you could easily switch Navia into that team as well, so you sort of have 2 on-field DPS characters, both with relatively short times, but then the whole thing is still gonna work out. Also, one very important thing to mention here is that Navia does not want to be played in mono Geo like many other Geo characters. Because of the fact that she needs to suck up those crystallized particles to get ammo for her skill, it is important to use her alongside characters that can trigger crystallized reactions, not only to get the shards, but also because she gets a damage bonus for every pyro, electro, cryo, or hydro unit in her team, so even though she's a Geo character, she wants to be in a reaction team. If you ask me, she works very great with Bennett in a team, not just because he can provide pyro to get the crystallized shards, but also for the fat attack buff. But also any other sub-DPS characters like Yelan, Xiangling are good. You could use her with Fischl, or also with Farina or Farina Bennett maybe even. That's very nice because those will give you 2 fat damage bonuses, so that's pretty cool. So yeah, as you see, Navia is very flexible and fits into a lot of reaction-based teams, deals a lot of damage there, and is generally a nice addition to pretty much everything. But what about you? In which teams do you like to play your Navia? Let me know in the comments down below. Alright, now that we've talked about her kit, her weapons, her teams, how free-to-play friendly is Navia actually? Well, if I'm being honest, in terms of free-to-play friendliness, I would say she's kind of meh. From her weapon point of view, you will at least have to pay the battle pass to get the Serpent Spine if you want to have a noticeably higher damage, and her free-to-play options are okay, but you can really feel the difference. From her team's perspective though, she is very flexible, fits into a lot of teams, also free-to-play teams, so that's pretty good. So as a free-to-play player, if you like her, you can definitely go for her. I'm not trying to tell you that you shouldn't do that, but at the end of the day, I would say if you are a free-to-play player and you're just generally looking for a strong, good DPS, then I would recommend maybe waiting for other, more traditionally hyper-carry on-field units, because there are a lot of strong damage dealers in the game, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Navia. Let's also very quickly talk about her constellations, because you know she's on a rerun, you might want to invest vertically into her if you really like her a lot. And here, it's pretty simple. Her C1 is nice, it gives you a bit more energy for your burst, so that's okay, but I wouldn't necessarily want to go for it just for this effect. Her C2, however, is really cool because this can give you up to 36% more crit rate for your elemental skill, and this is definitely be the strongest first stopping point when you want to vertically invest into her. And of course, if we want to go super ham, then C6 also helps greatly with the damage, but I personally would say you don't need any constellations for her to actually get good numbers out of her. And by the way, if you could leave a quick like on the video, that would be super nice because it helps me big time with the algorithm, especially for small channels like mine. So thank you so much for your support. And now, let's go on with the next character. Let's go on with the beautiful Hydro Dancer from Sumeru, Nilou. Nilou is a sword-wielding both on-field and off-field DPS character of the Hydro element. She is very specialized into one specific playstyle, and that is into a Bloom team, and that is also what her entire kit revolves around. So let's talk about that right now. First off, her normal attacks don't really matter and don't do a lot of damage. One big portion of her damage is actually her elemental burst, so let's talk about that real quick and get it out of the way, because we're gonna have to talk a lot about her skill afterwards. Her burst is really straightforward. It deals a lot of AoE hydro damage based on her maximum HP. It can do quite the numbers, and every enemy hit with the initial hit of the burst will have a little marker on them, and then 1 or 2 seconds later, they will get another instance of hydro damage, applying hydro again, dealing a lot of damage again, and all in all, her burst is basically a big AoE Hydro nuke. However, the main thing about her is her elemental skill, and this is a bit more complex, so let's take a look at it in detail. When you enable her skill, you enter the pirouette stance. What you can do in this stance is a 3-attack combo either by using her normal attacks or by tapping the skill button again. Depending on which of these two versions you enter the 3-attack combo with, a different thing will happen. If you end the combo with a normal attack, then for the next, I think, 8 seconds, you will infuse her normal attacks with Hydro, so you can apply a lot of Hydro to enemies by having her on the field and normal attacking them. In that sense, she's kind of a bit like Ayato, I might say, but she doesn't really have the AoE Hydro application that he has. She's more single target focused in this form. However, if you end the 3-hit pirouette combo with tapping her elemental skill, then she will create a Hydro AoE aura around her that persists even if you swap her off the field, and what this aura does is, every 2 seconds, it will apply Hydro to enemies around you. Now, what does this mean for you? Due to the fact that having her on the field and normal attacking will apply more Hydro, you want to use the normal attack version of her skill when you're up against one strong enemy, like for example a boss, so you can single target focus him and apply a lot of Hydro with your normal attacks. However, if you're up against a bigger group of enemies that surround you, you better go with the elemental skill version, because while it applies Hydro less often than your normal attacks, it does so in an AoE, and you're free to swap Nilou out and use other characters and the aura will still persist. So yeah, at the end of the day, Nilou's main job in the team is to apply as much Hydro as she can, and she also deals good damage when you use her elemental burst regularly, because that is a big nuke. Now, before we get to the weapons and the free-to-play friendliness, let's first talk about the teams with her. This chapter is really important if you're wondering if Nilou is for you or not. See, Nilou has one passive talent that really restricts her as to which teams you want to play with her. And that is, if the team only consists out of Hydro and Dendro units, then if you create Dendro cores with the Bloom reaction, those will not be normal Dendro cores, those are then called Bountiful cores, and what's so special about them is, they're bigger, they pretty much instantly explode, and they do a lot more damage than normal Dendro cores. So the best teams to play Nilou with are the so-called Nilou Bloom teams, where you only have Hydro, you only have Dendro, and the whole job of the team is just to create as many of these bountiful cores as possible so that the enemies will be drowning in explosions of Dendro energy, dealing a lot of damage. In that sense then, Nilou is ideally used if you already have Dendro characters, like for example Nahida, that would be great, or even Dendro Traveler, and Hydro units to get a team together that has a lot of Hydro and a lot of Dendro application to maximize the potential of this playstyle. Yes, Nilou being a good Hydro applier can be used in other reaction teams like for example Freeze or whatever, but the problem here is that in each and every one of these situations, other Hydro on-fielders are always the better solution. For example, if you want an on-fielder that has a lot of Hydro application, Ayato is going to be better than Nilou. If you want a Hydro on-fielder that just deals a ton of damage, then Neuvillette is going to be much better than Nilou. So at the end of the day, when it comes to Nilou and her teams, if you want to play this specific Nilou Bloom playstyle, then yes, absolutely go for her. But if you don't want and you want a Hydro on-fielder for other situations, then better don't go for her and wait until another one of those better Hydro on-fielders comes around the corner. With that being said, let's also quickly talk about her weapons, and this one is pretty straightforward. Nilou scales very crazy with her maximum HP, so you want to focus everything on getting that as high as you can, meaning as a 5-star, the Key of Kajnizut, I hope I pronounced that well, is going to be your best option. Then as a 4-star, the Dog Hands Assistant will be good as well, and beyond that, anything that can give you more HP or also energy regeneration, so you can burst more often, will be helpful, but when it comes to the weapon, don't focus on attack because she doesn't scale with that. Let's also quickly talk about how free-to-play friendly she is, and here it comes down very much to what you actually want. If you're a free-to-play player and you like the idea of her specific Bloom playstyle, then I would say there's no reason not to go for her. With units like Dendro Traveler being actually a really good Dendro applicator, and Barbara being a completely free Hydro unit, you already have 2 potent teammates to pair up with Nilou. However, if you don't want to play Nilou Bloom and you just want a Hydro on-fielder, then no matter if you're free-to-play, pay-to-play, or the biggest whale in the universe, I wouldn't recommend going for her in either case. In my opinion, she's used for Nilou Bloom teams, and that's it. Let's also here quickly talk about her constellations because, it's a rerun, you might want to vertically invest into her. And there we have her C1, mainly being used to increase the duration of your skill. Her C2 is phenomenal because it can decrease the enemy's hydro and dendro resistance, making this really powerful. And I would say if you want to vertically invest, go C2 or not at all. The rest of the constellations are fine, and then if you want to go super ham, then yes, C6 is going to give you a big portion of damage by increasing crit rate and increasing crit damage, but if you ask me, Nilou doesn't really need constellations to be good either. Okay, so much for the two characters in the first phase. Let's now go on to the second phase and start out with Emilie, the brand new 5-star introduced in 4.8. Now, what Emilie does is pretty straightforward. She is Dendro-official. Period. Like seriously, her kit is very similar to Fischl, just that in contrast to dealing Electro, she deals Dendro damage with it. What deals the damage here is her elemental skill, which creates a so-called Lumidus case. Think of it as kind of like the totems from Yaimiko, because this thing stands on the field and attacks enemies over time with Dendro projectiles, having, as far as we can see in the gameplay demo right here, a pretty healthy range. Only one of these cases can be active at the same time, but the special thing about this is that if an enemy is burning, then the burning enemy will produce scent, and Lumidus case sucks up the scent, and if it has sucked up enough scent, then it will level up to a level 2 Lumidus case, firing more projectiles and dealing more damage. What that means is, ideally, you want to play Emilie with pyro characters, so you can have enemies burning, thereby producing scent, and leveling up your turret so it can deal more damage. Her elemental burst then, similar to Fischl, is the same thing again, just more powerful, because it produces a level 3 Lumidus case that deals even more damage to enemies, and once the burst time is over, it will turn into a normal Lumidus case, staying on field, refreshing the duration and having a lot of uptime. One thing I really like about her is the fact that her burst and her skill kind of do the same thing, because that makes her super great for overworld activities, and I think this is something that a lot of the community still sleeps on. See, in those frequent situations where you're just going on in the overworld, you just want to have some enemy encounters here and there, characters that don't need their burst to work in the first place, that can deal damage and can function on just their skill, these types of characters are super convenient to play in the overworld, and Emilie is one of them. This is, by the way, also great for Natlan, because, next patch Natlan is going to come up, and it's going to be the Nation of Pyro, so having a character that benefits from burning is probably a very good thing to have going into Natlan. And all in all, I can just say I am really excited for Emilie. Let's next go about her teams, because I think there is a little bit of a misunderstanding for some players here, and then we go about the weapons afterwards. See, one thing you need to understand with her teams is that she does not increase the damage of the burning reaction. The burning reaction, just like before, isn't a really strong reaction because it doesn't have high multipliers, and even with Emilie, it will not be stronger. The reason why you want to have burning is to increase Emilie's personal damage, not the burning reaction damage. But this also means she's not exclusive to burning teams. Yes, she probably works best in those teams, but given the fact that she does general Dendro off-field damage, I think she can also very well work in Quicken or maybe even Hyper Bloom teams. As for her burning teams, of course you would pair her up with the standard stuff, a Pyro main DPS, maybe Nahida to apply Dendro, but you could also use other Dendro appliers, and then, for example, Bennett to buff up the damage, or Xiangling to deal even more Pyro off-field damage. As for her weapons, we actually have pretty good options here. Of course, her signature weapon, the Lumidus Elegy, will probably be her best in slot. The Calamity Queller would also be a good option, because in general she scales with attack, not with elemental mastery. So anything that gives you attack or crit is always a great option. For example, the Primordial Jadewing Spear would be good. As for Battle Pass weapons, the Deathmatch would be your #1 choice, so you're not limited to just her signature weapon. Now, if you're as excited for her as I am, you might be wondering how free-to-play friendly is she? And I think she's pretty good in that department because we have a lot of Pyro units, because we have, as Dendro, we have Dendro Traveler being a really good Dendro unit. So if you want to build a burn team, then you can very much do that as a free-to-play player. But especially when you're free-to-play, before you pull for her, wait until the full guides are out on her, see which numbers she can actually deal, then compare her to Yao Yao and see how much better in terms of damage she really is than Yao Yao, or if just going for 4-star Yao Yao might actually be enough for your Dendro needs. And last, but definitely not least, let's talk about a fan favorite, one of the most beloved characters in the game, the spicy detective Yelan from Liyue. Yelan is super strong. She's a bow user, hydro, and an off-field damage dealer, which can deal quite the numbers and does a lot of hydro application. Her normal attacks normally don't matter really much because usually you don't on-field her, although you could if you really wanted to. Her elemental skill lets you run forward, and whenever you come close to an enemy, you sort of tie your hydro zip line around them, and once the skill ends, you will deal hydro damage to every enemy that you touched with that zip line. Although it doesn't look that impressive on screen, the damage you can deal with that is actually pretty high, but in general, you mainly use this to generate hydro particles to fuel your elemental burst, because that is the big thing that Yelan revolves around. When triggering her burst, Yelan will create a hydro dice next to her in the air that will perform pretty strong hydro attacks whenever you attack an enemy, no matter if it is Yelan herself or also any other character, because that thing stays on even if you swap Yelan out. Also, as long as the burst is on, you will get a slowly ramping up damage bonus to your team, so Yelan doesn't just deal direct hydro damage, but also buffs the team up a little bit. All in all, her being a strong hydro applier and damage dealer, that makes Yelan a very valuable unit to pretty much any account, and I would recommend going for her. The problem with her though is that you really want to have your burst back up on cooldown, and that burst is unfortunately very energy hungry, so you need to make sure to have a lot of energy recharge. This is, by the way, also, when we're talking about weapon, why the Favonius Warbow is one of the best 4-star options for her, not really for the damage, but just because Yelan absolutely needs that energy recharge. Her signature, the Aqua Simulacra, is of course her best in slot, but beyond that, anything that gives her crit is naturally a good stat stick, but since her damage scales with her maximum HP, having bows that give you more HP, like for example even the 3-star recurve bow, definitely help. And by the way, if for whatever reason you should have the Silver Shower Heartstrings from Sijuin, this with the HP substat is actually pretty good on Yelan as well. As for her teams, well, since she is a Hydro unit and Hydro is one of the most flexible elements ever in the game, Yelan is always gonna perform nicely. One team core that I should mention here, which is very strong and has always been, is Yelan with Xingqiu, because as you might have noticed, her burst is very similar to Xingqiu's burst, and if you combine both of them, not only will you get the Hydro Elemental Resonance, which gives you more health and therefore more damage, but also, since both of them are Hydro units, and specifically Xingqiu is a good battery and produces a lot of Hydro particles, then this helps Yelan big time with her energy needs, and of course you have absolutely crazy Hydro application with both of them shooting their Hydro projectiles from off-field. It's really ridiculous and I can only recommend it. But now, how free-to-play friendly is Yelan really? In my personal playbook, Yelan is a great unit, especially for free-to-play players out there, because of all the power from off-field that she provides to your account. The Favonius Warbow is a gacha weapon, but you will get one copy of it just as a quest reward, so you will definitely already have a good weapon option for her. And with Xingqiu being a very accessible 4-star character, you can build a super strong and sophisticated Hydro team core that works very well with many characters out there. I would even go so far to say, from all the 4 characters in 4.8, go for Yelan, she is going to be your best bet. Let's also quickly talk about Yelan's constellations, which is luckily pretty straightforward. Her C1 gives your skill an additional charge, so you could use that 2 times back to back without cooldown. This is especially good for exploration because that means you can run very fast for a long time, but also because of the fact that she has that much of an energy problem, being able to cast her skill twice will produce twice the amount of particles, and therefore her C1 is not really that much for her skill, but more like an energy cost reduction for her burst. If you ask me, pretty useful actually, although her second constellation, her C2, is the bread and butter of her constellations. This one will make it that whenever your burst fires a coordinated attack, you will get one more of those Hydro arrows that deals 14% of Yelan's maximum HP as Hydro damage, and thereby increases her overall damage output by around 20%. If you want to vertically invest into her, this is a great stopping point, but you could also go the extra step to C3, which increases the elemental burst by 3 levels, and since her elemental burst is the main thing of her kit, this will also increase your damage output and generally be pretty good. Unfortunately, as of making this video, we don't know anything yet about the accompanying 4-star characters or the weapon banners. But once we have more info, I'll put out a follow-up video discussing all these aspects in more detail. So if you don't want to miss out on that, then make sure to leave a sub. Welcome to the crew. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, travel smart.